Hello, and welcome back to an episode of a podcast series presented by the Los Angeles Violoncello Society. My name is Vardan Gasparyan, and today joining me is former principal cellist of the LA Phil, a former faculty member at USC Thornton School of Music and the Colburn School of Music, and my former teacher, Ron Leonard. Hello, Mr. Leonard.
Hello.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this today.
My pleasure.
My first question for you is, do you remember when did you decide to become a professional musician? And if there was an event that made you realize, okay, I want to do cello full time, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life?
I think when I was about maybe 12 years old, I wasn't a particularly good student at school. It didn't interest me very much, but I did enjoy playing the cello. And by the time I was 12, I don't know if I had a conscientious thought of being a cellist, but that was the only thing that I was interested in. And then as I started getting better and better during my 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, at 15, I was a member of the Rhode Island Philharmonic. And I enjoyed it so much. And one day the conductor came up to me and he said, "You know, I look at you playing and you're always looking at me." And that kind of stuck in my head. So all my life as a principal cellist, I have a way of sort of scanning a line of music. So I look at music and I'm looking there at the conductor, and as a result, no conductor ever gave me a bad time. One did, but that was a different story.
And it shall not be named today.
I won't mention the name, no. But I never thought of doing anything else in my life. And I also had an older brother who was an excellent pianist, and he accompanied me a lot. I played a lot of little recitals when I was in my teens, and so that helped me a lot too.
I'm curious, were your parents close to music, or were they professional musicians?
Well, my mother played piano, violin, and trumpet.
Wow.
What a combination. I never heard her play violin or trumpet, but I heard her playing piano. And she and my father, she would play with these small ensembles at weddings and bars and all kinds of things. And my father would always go with her and be with her when she was doing it. He himself was absolutely tone deaf. So somehow between the two, I became a musician and I ended up with perfect pitch. As a matter of fact, my parents there were 7 kids in my family. I was the 5th of 7. And the last one was a girl. I think they just kept trying until they got a girl. And they decided that each of us had to play two different instruments, piano and whatever else we wanted. And so I started on piano, and I was a decent pianist, but not good. And I knew my older brothers were much, much better than I was. So my parents, I think my mother took me to a cellist playing a solo with the Boston Symphony. But I thought, gee, that's pretty cool. I want to try that. That was it.
Oh, interesting.
But I was very, very fortunate, and I've told all my students this, that I had a wonderful first teacher, and she loved me, and she worked with me. She was very insistent, but very positive, and through her, I learned to love music. And when I got to a certain stage, I think when I was 15, she decided that I needed to go to somebody else, which I've always been thankful for, because there are so many teachers who hold on to their students, and this is my project, and they're not going to let anybody else do it, which is very, very short-sighted. And she took me to Boston, where Samuel Mays was the principal cellist, and he had been a student at Curtis. So I would go I lived in Providence, and we took the train up to Boston, my teacher and myself, and she would sit on my lessons, and she would treat me to a nice lunch and then take me back, and I was flabbergasted by Samuel Mays. He was a remarkable cellist. He's the one, by the way, he was later on in life, he was principal of the Philadelphia Orchestra. And the Montagnana that Yo-Yo Ma bought had been owned by Samuel Mays.
I see.
So,
Interesting. I wanted to ask you to maybe talk a little bit about your experience, or share your memories, or perhaps the highlight of studying with an absolute legend, Leonard Rose.
Yeah, he was a legend, and deservedly so. He had the most beautiful sound, and a big sound that you could imagine. And once again, he treated me like I was his grandson, and he called me Ronnie dear all the time. Ronnie dear, that's out of tune. Ronnie dear, you can make this sound better. It was always couched in a very gentle way. He's much nicer than I am, and he was just absolutely fantastic. And whatever I learned from him, I've taught all my life. So he was a tremendous influence on my life, and I heard him playing with the Istomin. Istomin was a pianist, and Isaac Stern trio many times. And while I was at Curtis, he was going to play the Kabalevsky Concerto with a chamber orchestra in New York City. Now I can't think of the name of it. It was very well known. I can't think of the name of it. But he was going to perform with them the Kabalevsky Concerto. But then he had a cancellation or a conflict of some kind. So he asked me to play the concerto for him.
Wow.
And if you know that piece, there's a section in the last movement that sounds very similar to a section in the Tchaikovsky violin concerto. So, and it's very, very hard passage. So they used that example before I began to play the concerto, to play the then the violinist played the then he played the same thing. But that was my first experience playing with a sort of major orchestra.
How long have you been living in LA, and what made you move to Los Angeles?
Well, it's a very funny story. I had been teaching at the Eastman School of Music, and my wife, who was a violinist, was also teaching at the Eastman School of Music, and we both played in the orchestra, and I was principal cello there. I was principal cello for about 10 years. And then I decided that, how did it work? I had enough playing in the orchestra, and so I just taught. And then the opening came up in
the LA Phil?
In the LA Phil. Well, first of all, Leonard Rose. Oh no, this was before that. Leonard Rose also gave me great advice. I'm off topic, but when I was getting ready to graduate from Curtis, I had the opportunity to play principal cello of the New Orleans Symphony, and the conductor was the assistant concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he used a lot of students in his orchestra. But Leonard Rose said to me, you know, it'd be great to play principal cello, but you'll play principal cello in your life. I'd like you to play for George Sell. And so, and if he likes you, you would get the best experience, orchestra experience you could possibly get in the Cleveland Orchestra. So I played for Sell, and he was a big man, and he had very, very thick glasses, and I went to, you couldn't do this these days, I went to his apartment in New York and played for him, and he was sitting in a great big armchair, and he's looking at me with these eyes look like they were magnified. And he said, okay, play. And he had me play a whole bunch of orchestral excerpts. And one of them was Strauss' Don Juan. So he had me play a passage in that, and he said, okay, now play it softer. Okay, so I said, now play it softer. And he said that about 5 times. And play it softer. And, you know, it was a little bit hairy. And the other thing that happened in that audition was that he brought out Beethoven 8th, and on the second ending of it, I played a wrong note. And so I got through it, and he said, you know, you played a wrong note. I said, yeah, on the second ending I screwed up. Yeah, but the same thing happened when I auditioned for Zubin Mehta. I played Don Quixote, and there's a big run. It goes way, way up high. And I made the most outlandish notes at the top. It was really ridiculous. He just laughed. You know, people worry about being perfect at an audition. Didn't bother him at all. He liked what he heard, so there I was.
This is a nice segue to my next question, actually. What would be your one advice to someone who's planning on taking an orchestral audition in the future? One or two maybe advices.
Yeah, some people can get away with learning the orchestral excerpts just before they're going to take an audition. But I think that's very short-sighted. So I made it a project to go through a lot of the excerpts with a lot of my students, year after year. Every year, there's a fairly short list of what are the standard pieces. And you cannot be too prepared for those auditions. And there's nothing like an audition. It's not the same as playing a concerto. It's not the same as playing a recital with a pianist. It's not the same as a chamber music performance. It's very singular, and especially now, it's anybody who gets a position in a major orchestra is up against a lot of wonderful players. So when I hear of these orchestras, and I won't mention which ones, but there are a couple who are amazing. They've had cello openings year after year after year, and they never hear anybody who's good enough. And I have always known a bunch of cellists who are taking these auditions, and they're wonderful. But for some reason, oh no, he's not, she's not, he's not. It's like practicing for getting nervous. I can't make myself nervous, but I can be nervous when I walk on stage. It's only then that you really get nervous, and you simply have to learn how to control those nerves. I mentioned in this class that I gave today about practicing slow bows, so that if I had to, I could walk on a stage and play the slowest bow imaginable without the bow shaking. That was another thing I did with Leonard Rose. I won the Walter Naumburg competition when I was at Curtis, and he arranged a recital at his house in Long Island for me to play through the recital for a bunch of friends. And I started out with a Passacaglia by Bach, and it was in C minor, and it was and I played it and it went and all through the whole piece, my bow shook like you would not believe. And I got over it after the second piece, but at the end of the program, I decided I needed to play that piece again. So as an encore, I played the same Bach piece, and I aced it. You know, it was a good lesson.
Nice.
Yeah.
And probably last question. Throughout the years, I'm sure you've seen many students and taught many different people. And what is one advice you have for educators like myself when dealing with different personalities, different levels of talent, and
yeah. You know, there are so many levels of talent, and my approach to teaching was that I approached every student basically in the same way. I remember my wife studied with Ivan Galamian, and he went through the same routines and said the same things, except people would walk out of his lessons and they would say, oh, he told me this at that lesson. And the next guy would play the same piece and he said, well, he told me this in that lesson. So in that way, you have to adjust to the student and see where you need to go with that particular student. But I never felt that I treated the lesser talented people not as good as I did the more talented. Because very often it's the people who do the right kind of work, who may not initially be the most talented, but they often end up being the best prepared to be musicians.
Excellent.
It's how you put yourself together.
Great advice, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this today with me.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of Asking the Master, a podcast series presented by LAVS. Make sure to check out our website at lacello.org and our Instagram page at la_cello_society. Thank you so much and see you next time.